Welcome. Welcome to another episode of This Isn't About Me podcast. And today I am very excited to be joined by my very good friend, David Delisle. And I'm going to let him introduce himself. But per usual, no idea where the conversation will go, but I'm excited to have you here. And feel free to take a minute and just introduce yourself. Thank you for being.
So I'm David Delisle. I'm a speaker, author, real estate investor, dad, and really for me, I've got a passion with teaching young kids new ideas that'll ripple outwards and change their lives. So we can go any direction from there and see where this conversation goes. I'm excited.
Yeah. Perfect. Nice and concise. I love that. Yeah. So I happen to know you quite well, and I happen to know that you have a lot of big ideas, but I would love for people to hear your voice and share a little bit of just sort of like what your passion is in those ripple effects and what some of those ideas are. And sort of, I'd really love to dive into how the way that you see the world, because you have a very unique way of seeing things that I don't think everybody does see things the way that you do. So I would like to go that direction.
Sure, we can ramble a little bit here. So we're seeing the world differently. I think a big part of it, and I'm experiencing and learning this as well, of how different that is, because you don't realize all the time. But
Mhm.
definitely, I lead with curiosity almost always. So I'm extremely curious, but with that curiosity, I'm open. So I'm just open to see what'll happen, very curious. And then the way my mind works, because it's fairly analytical, I start connecting dots and seeing threads because I'm just open. I don't know what the threads will be, but I'm just open for receiving that and seeing those things.
Mhm.
And so, sort of beginning some of this more recent journey, like with becoming an author, for me, the idea was just to put down some simple notes for my boys, tell them things that I thought about for finance, and call it a day. But in that process, I started realizing so much more of it, the way I think about it, it's more mindset than the actual specifics. And then with that mindset is by looking at something differently. And what I love is just putting out these ideas that are just slightly different and then seeing what happens. It doesn't matter if people agree with them, disagree. As soon as you start engaging, I've won, because all I'm trying to do is get you to look at something differently and question it. And that's the thing, is I think that curiosity that I have, people might, most people aren't as curious as they might think they are. Whereas I'm constantly trying to look at things differently. So if I can shed a light on something a little bit different than the way you've seen it before, then that can change the way you view everything. And that's what gets exciting. That's what I get passionate about. So the reason I love kids is because they have less resistance to these new ideas.
Mhm.
But I love talking to adults and people of any ages. It's just really cool when you see kids and their eyes are bright and the world is just completely open to them. They have no resistance. And you start talking about them, and then they give you new ideas and get excited and passionate about it. So that always lights me up.
Yeah, I love that. And we had a conversation one time about the book and the book called The Golden Quest for anybody who's listening, and how really the concepts are very simple and they're simple things that kids really get. And when my youngest read the book, he was super excited about the last lesson actually in the giving part, which was really interesting for me to see. It's interesting to see what lands with them, and I think like everything kind of lands differently with every kid. For him it was in the giving, and he was like, you mean that if I can, like, if I go out and I give, I am going to get more money back? It was just really fascinating to see that, like, that's sort of the message that landed for him, and he still talks about all the, like, he'll randomly bring up the lessons in the book. And that's what I think makes the book so great, but also what makes you and your messaging and your passion so great is that they are, as we had this great conversation about, they're very simple things that even kids can get, but they stick with them because they're so simple.
For sure. So I'll back up a bit for the audience listening. So I wrote a book that's a graphic novel. And this graphic novel, it's targeted towards kids about 5 to 12, but really the messages, as you mentioned, they're for adults as
For
well,
everybody. Yeah.
for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically lessons to, lessons around money, but really the most important lessons as far as I'm concerned. And really there's only a few simple lessons. And that one that you're referring to, that lesson is given, you'll have more. And it was really interesting. I really played with that one. And that's, again, back to these simple ideas, because there's a lot of research around giving. And most of us know that it's good to give. And even in schools now, they teach, donations and givings and bringing in, dollars or change for charities or cans. And so we get these concepts, but there's a big ripple effect that comes from just those activities. And that's what I want to sort of get across as well, that because in the act of giving, so many little other things change that you don't even realize, more actually does start coming back to you. And so in the book, I try to illustrate that through just a blacksmith. And again, this idea of giving, she felt like if she gave, she would have less. And that's how a lot of us think, like it's a kind act, but the natural act of giving, we're giving something away. And that's how this blacksmith felt as well in the book. But as the story progresses, she starts realizing how it made her feel. And not only and that feeling made her, give more, but also do more, but also attracted more towards her. Because it's, if you believe in the law of attraction or you don't, the simple act of just being happy and kind, more people are going to be happy and kind to you. And so it's going to extrapolate outward. So you don't even know how it's going to happen, but it's all these little ripples, where in the book, I don't have to explicitly say, this is what it is. Just start giving and you're going to feel better and stuff's going to start happening. And I love that, like your son, that's what he picked up on. It doesn't matter about all the nuance. He knows that if he starts giving more, more will come back. And the reality is that's true. It's true across the board. And we have statistics that show that. So I love that he grasped on that. And just imagine, like, if this whole generation of kids picked up on this concept and felt like giving made them richer and were encouraged to give and receive. And that's the world we lived in. I mean, that changes everything. So that's why I get so passionate about this.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just having a conversation, and for a different episode of the podcast, and with Jill, and she was saying that generally if you are giving, I'm totally going to get the words wrong on it, but giving will make you a happier person, and happy people don't start wars. This was really like the end of it, and like how much better the world could be if we were all sort of doing more of that and could grasp that concept, that really giving, in the giving, you're receiving a whole lot more. And that was a whole nother episode. So there's a whole episode on giving, but that is not the purpose of this episode. This episode is really to talk about just really simple concepts and how profound of a change and a difference they can have on the world.
Yeah. So I know we don't want to go too far down the giving, but that's exactly it. So I could just say simply, give and you'll have more. And your 10-year-old son can pick that up and run with that. And that's all he has to know. And at the same time, all these other things happen. So like you said, you start with the wars. It's very difficult. I don't even know if it's possible to feel poor if you're giving. It gives you this feeling of feeling rich, because if you're in a position to give, you must have more to the person you're giving to, or at least you start feeling gratitude. So gratitude comes out of it. This feeling of feeling, rich, this abundance, also it's very hard to be in your own head and upset with your, questioning life or your decisions or anything else. When you're in that moment of giving, you're connecting with someone else and you're making a difference in the world. And like all these things just start extrapolating out and rippling out. And it's just, that's the thing. So for me, I try to think of, okay, well, what's the core, what's the essence, what's the root of all of this, so that a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old could get that message and then not worry about the rest, because I've already distilled it into that small little idea.
Right. Simple concepts, but so much depth to them. They're simple, but there's so much more that's under every single one of those concepts. And I know the big overarching, message and theme in the book is around your awesome stuff. If you want to talk about that, if you want to have that conversation, which is lesson number 1 in the book, is really about finding your awesome stuff, which is different for everybody. And it's not the same, and it's not what people initially think that it is.
Yeah, it's again one of those, it's a simple concept. What I love about this idea of the awesome stuff is that whenever I talk to people about the awesome stuff, they're like, yeah, I know, I get it. Like, obviously I'd buy only awesome stuff and all my stuff's awesome. Like that's how the boy reacts in the book. That's how adults react. That's how everybody reacts. And it's because we're on autopilot. We've got momentum going and we feel like, why would we not be doing something that we loved? Why would we not be doing something that is awesome or buying what's awesome? And then you just dive a little bit deeper and you realize most of us haven't paused or reflected or stopped or questioned what we do or why, or what we buy or why. And that's this whole piece. And it's that mindset piece. And it's looking at, if you're just sticking with things, looking around your house or thinking of your purchases and thinking what really brings you joy. What's your favorite thing? Even a 5-year-old knows what their favorite item is. We know as parents, if we forget that stuffy on a vacation or the house is on fire, the one thing we have to grab, like we know what that is.
Yeah.
And all the rest is just stuff. And so when you start noticing that then becomes your benchmark of what's awesome to you. And it's going to be different for everyone. And it's going to constantly change. Like as you keep creating those benchmarks and realizing it's going to change, and you're going to start realizing all the stuff that doesn't matter as much to you just falls away. And the stuff that's really important rises to the top. And then that same concept in the book, it's towards money, and it's a book about riches and wealth, but it can be applied to friendships and work and experiences and how you spend your day and what impact you want to create in the world and all these things. It's all the same lesson. It's focusing on what really is important to you. And so the benchmark's the one piece, but a key component that I find, like having conversations, kids get it. Like that's why I love kids. Like they know pretty quick what lights them up. Adults, parents don't necessarily. And so usually the answer I get isn't right. And when I say it isn't right, there's no judgment. Like awesome stuff is different for everybody, but it's not right for them. And I can tell it's not right for them because just the way they tell me what their awesome stuff is. And it's something that if you're not feeling it in the body and you're not talking about this thing and your eyes don't light up and you don't lean in and you don't get super excited and you can't talk about this thing forever, it probably isn't your awesome stuff. Because once you get going, everybody has that thing. When you start talking about like a memory or an experience or a thing they bought or their cherished item, and they'll just go off on it. And it's not always what we think. So again, just shining that light, bringing that focus towards that awareness towards something that you might not have thought about before. And
yeah. And the power of it, as we've discussed before, is really the power is in the pause. In the pausing to compare to the benchmark. So my favorite example that I always make you re-talk about is the sweater thing. And I'm probably going to paraphrase, but basically, if you think of all the things that you own, you think of everything, all the clothes that are in your closet, and you think about the one piece that you like wear over and over, and um, it just makes you feel really good, and it makes you feel cozy or sexy or whatever the thing is that it makes you feel, but you light up every time you get to wear that sweater. That becomes the benchmark that you're comparing other purchases against. And taking then next time you're out shopping and you're looking at, whatever else you're looking to buy, really taking the moment to pause and to reflect and to say, does this thing that's in front of me make me feel the way that sweater makes me feel? And so that sweater is what becomes the benchmark, right?
Exactly. So yeah, that's the concept.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds simple, it sounds easy, like just, we see it with even Marie Kondo's tidying up, like just minimalism and having less. And then just doing that, all these other things start to happen. So if you took your sweater as an example and imagine a closet just full of stuff, make it like a whole walk-in closet. Like that's what we want, this big, massive walk-in closet with all the things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just full of all these sweaters and that one sweater, but with all this other stuff. And so you are frantically looking through your closet, trying to find that sweater that's your favorite and realize it's not even there. It might be in the laundry or something. But all that other stuff is taken away from the thing you really love.
Mm-hmm.
So more isn't more. It's actually a distraction. So that can be a metaphor for all sorts of things. That's just with having more things. As well, some people take it and they're like, oh, okay, this is a book about money. So only buying the awesome stuff means you buy less stuff and you have more money. And that can be a concept that's a part of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we're constantly chasing and always looking for the next thing to buy, then we never have enough. And that's the lesson we have right now. So when I think about the reason this is the first lesson is because the first lesson usually around money is how to buy more things, how to have more
How
money.
to have more money so you can buy more things
That's the entire, like that's the first lesson and the only lesson. Like
that
that's
you
that's
mostly
all we learn.
hear, that you hear out there in the world by other financial experts, right?
And if that is the lesson, it doesn't matter. Like you start getting, 5 sweaters, 10 sweaters, then you get the walk-in closet. Then you realize, well, I've got 2 houses now and I need sweaters in one location and sweaters in another. Like it never ends. And we're talking about sweaters, but this is for everything. So for me, to break that cycle is to know what you really love. Because once you know what your favorite thing is, if you know that's your favorite sweater, and I know it's silly with sweaters, but use it as a metaphor.
I
If
know.
you know
It's
that's
my
your
favorite
favorite,
example, though. It's so easy to picture and grasp, I think.
I love that you picked up. I throw all sorts of things out there. So I love that you like the sweaters. I use stuffies. Some people talk about watches and cars. It's different for everybody, or experiences, traveling with their kids. Like the thing for the example doesn't matter, but all those things just extrapolate outward. So then if you do know that, it's very hard to keep chasing more because you don't want more. So it breaks that cycle of always wanting more and waiting for the next thing. So it breaks that cycle of consumerism. So you have less things. So your focus is on all the stuff that you love. You're
Mm-hmm.
not chasing more. So you're not stuck in this endless consumerism, always feeling like you don't have enough. And keep in mind, people think, well, that person with $1 million does have enough. Or if you had 1 million, that person with 10 million has enough, or the 100 million. So we always look and think, well, there is a place where you will have enough. I have not seen it. Even with our billionaires, they haven't reached that, depending on their mindset. If you don't have a mindset around these things we're talking about now, you will never have enough. And that's the crazy thing. So that's why I'm trying to break that cycle. And there's a million other things that come out of that as well. So it's just all these things from just a simple example. As far as the kids are concerned, it's like 1 or 2 pages in a comic book, and it says, only buy the awesome stuff. This is how you visualize your favorite thing in your room, and everything else doesn't matter. That's all they need to know. But all these other things will happen where now they'll grow up, not be as, not be the same consumers that they would have been otherwise, have more gratitude for the things they do have, be happier because they're not distracted from what's really important. So instead of talking about sweaters, if the awesome stuff is friendships, how much
Mhm.
time have we spent with friends that we enjoy their company, but we don't love their company? That's a lot of time that we're putting out there and spending. And if we realize, no, I'm just going to spend it with the people I love, like time is one of our most valuable assets. And you start refocusing on what lights you up and what's important, what's your awesome stuff, you're just naturally going to have a better life, because that awesome stuff isn't my awesome stuff, it's your awesome stuff. So you're
Mhm.
only choosing the things that are really important to you.
Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts per usual when when people go off on tangents or rant on this podcast.
Tangent, call
Um,
it a tangent, not a rant. Maybe a rant. That was a bit of soapboxy.
it
I get
was a
excited
little,
about it.
it was a long monologue. It's okay. That is literally what this podcast is for you to have a voice and for you to share that voice. So thank you for sharing the voice. Um, yeah, it's interesting you talk about the friendship part. We haven't, that's a piece we've never talked on before. And I was just talking with my oldest last night about how he's like in that phase. He's 10 and he has hit the I hate school thing that is coming up a lot. And I keep trying to bring him back to like, you don't know it right now, but school is the greatest thing because you get to hang out with your friends all day and you're not going to get to do that later in life. And I keep trying to like bring him back to that because the academic part clearly does not light him up. But I know that he loves to spend time with his friends, and that's the part I miss so much about school was sharing my locker with my best friend all through high school and middle school and seeing her every morning and seeing all my good friends every morning. And then we grow up and we move separately and we don't get to see our friends every day anymore. And I'm like, you're gonna miss it later in life. So try to embrace it right now. But I love the friendship aspect of it and the time, right? And time is such an important investment.
Yeah. And that's the thing, you learn that lesson. Like you start learning the awesome stuff and you apply it to sweaters. And then one day you'll wake up and you realize, why don't I apply that to my work, my friendships, my travel, uh, things that I do to create impact in the world, all these things. It's all the same lesson. You could apply it to any of those things. And even the friendships, I'll push back a bit. I mean, yes, I mean, it's very difficult to recreate high school in adulthood. Like I mean, that is difficult. But again, it's one of those things where, and this is where my curiosity comes in. So rather than just taking it for granted that you can't see your friends every morning or you can't do all these things, is there a way that could be possible? Or is there a way that could be more possible? Or how do you encourage more of that? And you start seeing like, okay, maybe you moved away for work and now you're not near any of your friends. What's more important, the work or the friends? And in some cases, it's the work, it's the opportunity, it's other things. But again, it's just that awareness, because then you can start figuring out, well, what is more important to you? Or, should we be in the same town or even work? Do I love the people I work with? They start becoming your friends. And if you don't, that's not very fun. But if you do, it's sort of like high school. You wake up in the morning and you go
I know, I
by and
did
you
say
go,
that. I did say that. I was like, unless you get to a job and then it's kind of like that, you're gonna make friends if you're working in an office and you're gonna get to hang out with your friends every day again. I did throw that part in there in that conversation, but
well, and the thing is, there's no magic answer, but you might realize, oh, maybe I'm busy with the school drop off, but I've got 10-15 minutes to grab a quick coffee with some of the parents that I love. Or,
mhm.
I can have someone over instead of having this like loud, crazy dinner with the kids. and then they just leave anyway and don't talk to you. I can invite my friends over and we could all have dinner together. Like it just, and it doesn't mean these are things you have to do. Because I hate the haves and the shoulds. It's just, again, an awareness of if you really miss that, because not everyone does love high school. So I'll throw that in there
I
as well.
know.
Like
I
I
know.
loved it.
I'm a weird exception probably.
I loved it as well. And I love those aspects of it. And I miss it as well for those same reasons. So rather than thinking about how much I miss, I try to, as much as possible, think of how can I recreate the parts that I did miss today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, what else am I supposed to tell my kid to get him to like school? Come on.
You can tell them. It was your mom's favorite, so you should like it. I don't, did it land? Did he believe you?
Not really. I had to go back. I had to go and say, do you know how sometimes you talk about how you wish you were a baby again and like you want to be little again? Like later in life, you're going to look back and say, I wish I was in fifth grade again.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, I don't know, that kind of landed, but
You
we're
could just
still working on it.
ask him what his favorite things about school are, and just get him to start thinking about those,
We
focusing
used
on
to do
those.
that actually as a exercise every night that our principal at our when he was going into kindergarten said, when you're laying in bed at night, when they're like actually talkative, ask them what their favorite part of the day was. And so I started doing that with him when he was in kindergarten. And at first it was always like recess, recess and lunch. And then after like a couple of weeks of that or a week of that, I probably didn't have the patience to listen to that every time for very long. So after
Yeah.
that, I was like, all right, top 3 things that happened today, not including recess or lunch. You have to tell me actual tangible things that other things besides that, because I know recess and lunch are your favorite and it's an easy out. So we did used to do that, but we've much fallen off that wagon in as he's gotten older, and I don't get to have that one-on-one time so much with him anymore in the same way. So
And
maybe
now
I'll
he
go
doesn't
back
like
to it though.
school because you stopped letting him talk about recess and lunch.
Because I
What's wrong with recess and lunch? Maybe that is his favorite thing.
it
Hangs out with
is
his
his
friends and
favorite, but
plays with
I think it challenges him to look beyond the obvious. There's a reason why I don't want it to be recess and lunch every day, because that's the easy out answer. It's actually very similar to you challenging everybody who thinks they know what their awesome stuff is, right? It's like, all right, so easily it's recess and lunch. Yeah, okay, great. That's fine. But I would rather encourage him to look a little bit deeper than that obvious surface level answer, and to cultivate some of that gratitude and appreciation for the other things that happen. Saying that sometimes it's a good conversation with a friend, or a really good lunch that day, or like the math concept landed and you were the first one to finish your quiz, right? Like there's all these other like little hidden gems of moments that happen throughout our day that's not just recess and lunch. And then he actually started making me do that too. So it was actually really good practice for both of us. We had to pick 3 things that were not recess or lunch.
because they're the same for you.
Obviously, my favorite part of the day is recess and lunch. Really, anytime I'm eating is really my favorite part of the day. But no, I think it's actually that's a very similar practice and correlation to your awesome stuff, right? Is about just like taking the time to pause and to recognize and to appreciate the good things that we do have in our all right, so talk to me about what else is what else is on your heart and what your other messages are. And
What's on my heart? Like, so there's a bunch of things. Recently, it's not the thing I'm most excited about, but I'm starting to get excited about is this idea of showing, letting people see what I see when I see young kids that I think is often overlooked because they're so loud and messy, sticky, and like all the things. Like they're annoying. Like kids are annoying and selfish. Like they just are.
mhm.
But I love kids. And so playing with this idea of trying to just figure out a way to easily show what I see in those kids past the annoying, selfish, sticky, loud, all those other things. Because it's all these things we're talking about. Like that, the reason I like them is it's a lot of this. Like kids are very present. If you ask them what their awesome stuff is, they know. They're
Mhm.
not thinking about yesterday or tomorrow. Like they're very in the present. Their eyes light up and they're passionate about what they get excited about. Like the reason they're loud half the time, they don't even realize they're loud. They're just excited and they don't censor that.
Yeah.
And there's no limiting beliefs and anything's possible. And they've got all this exuberance and it's just overflowing. And then because we just see we don't see that, we see the loud and the annoying, and we see it as something different, we start to squash all those things and then become adults and wonder, why aren't we present? And why aren't we loud? And why don't we laugh? And why don't we play or chase? Or, why are we not excited about things anymore? So I do feel like there's a correlation between showing that so that at least as adults, we see some of that beauty in these kids and might hesitate a bit before we squash it. And in that hesitation, these kids might start growing up to be a lot more present and have more joy and bigger dreams.
I don't know. What's your thought on
So
how
this
we
might be
don't squash how do we not squash the creativity and the loudness and the bigness of our children? Let's go there.
so this might be fun because you um, asked who I am, and I can't really answer that, but this is something fun to run with because this will give you a bit of a peek into like my process and exactly that. So I've always felt that, but I didn't really have put much attention to that or notice a difference or see how it could extrapolate outwards with the squashing. And then some stuff started just connecting of like, oh, like what I see is different than other people. And if they saw what I saw, they might be more excited when they see kids than they are. Like right now, I find most people, if they see like a really cute dog or even like a baby or, a squirrel, they'll get excited. But they don't necessarily have that same excitement when they see a kid,
Mhm.
especially if it's not their own. Like if it's their own, it's different, but I'm just talking about kids in general,
Even my own kids.
even your own,
Not
even my
always.
own, even my own, because they're all these things. And so for me, part of the process is having a conversation like this. So I've started talking to more people about it to just sort of see what lands, what doesn't, what comes back. Because I'm processing this idea because right now it's too complicated as I explain it. So it doesn't just hit and land in the same way some of these other ones do. So I'm just playing with it. But I do feel like there is room to show a different perspective because it's all intent. So when we see a kid being extremely loud and noisy and disrespectful, we're going to discipline them because they're noisy, loud, and disrespectful. Or if we're not disciplining them, at the very least, we're going to be annoyed or try to ignore them.
Mhm.
But what if they're not? What if they're those things and so it's not that's all they are. They're those things and those other things are caught up in this like really overbursting joy or excitement, or they're feeling so much passion for something or so much innocence for something, they don't even realize all these things are happening. They're still not adults, they're kids. So they can be overwhelmed very easily and caught up in something. That imagine if you were caught up in that same excitement about a trip you're going to do, or a thing you just bought, or a client that just came in, whatever it is, and you need to share it with someone, and you want to like scream and run around, or you're feeling those things. We might tamper it down as
Definitely
adults,
want to
but
scream and run around.
right, imagine if we could tap into that. So instead of seeing all those other aspects for the kids, we saw that perspective change, and that shift, I think, would change the way you react to that child when those things happen.
Okay, I can play with that. I can get on board with that. I think you mentioned to me at one point, like the sort of correlation or connection to not comparing kids to dogs, but
I like that though.
but the like nobody like tamps down the dog's excitement when you walk in the door, right? Or I mean, you kind of do, but you're not like, oh God, that dog is so annoying. Generally, we're like, dogs are cute. We love dogs. I mean, I'm allergic to a lot of dogs, so I don't love as many dogs as most people, but most people really love dogs. And I know that's sort of like a correlation that you had, an example you had created or come up with before, to say, like, what if we could view our kids more like with the excitement and the love and the sort of like the unconditional love that we extend to our pets.
Mm-hmm. And that's where, again, this is because we're just having this open conversation. I'm trying to give a peek of it into my process. So this isn't a message that I'm out there that's ready to be shared, but even just having this conversation, there's a few people that'll listen in and maybe think a little bit differently. And having this conversation with you, the thoughts get a little tighter. And the reason I was thinking dogs is because a lot of what we like about dogs is their innocence, their loyalty, their excitement, their love, unconditional love. Those things exist in most children, young
Right.
children, for sure. But if I go and, like, it's the new year, if I went to buy a calendar, there'd be like a whole section of like dog and cat calendars. Maybe baby
Yes.
calendars, a few as well. There's no toddler calendar. Like, nobody's buying a calendar of toddlers
Or 10-year-olds.
or 10-year-olds.
No one thinks
And
your
it's
10-year-old is cute, really.
because that's what we don't see that in them, but that is in them. And so that's why I'm making the correlation. Like, if there's some way I could show, oh, the same things you love, like when you open up that calendar and you're like, oh, look at that dog, he looks so cute and he's so happy. Yeah, your kids and the world's kids, like, they look the same. If you stop seeing that they're also loud and obnoxious and selfish and all these other things, if you got past all that, you'd see that. And in seeing that, maybe be a little more empathetic with the child, maybe be a little bit slower to discipline or stop that, maybe be a little bit more curious of what they're excited about or why they're being so loud, rather than just tell them to stop what they're doing. And that's the thing. And then we grow up being taught, anytime you're excited and happy, stop that feeling, be quiet, be seen, don't be heard, and then live your life that way. And then we look around and we're like, oh, that's why we're having conversations like this, trying to tell people to get back to their joy. It's always been there, we just lost it.
Yeah. Damn society just tamps us down. I actually love the connection to this conversation with also the awesome stuff, and really the core message there being the pause. And I know that's where you're getting to in your message as well, but like the power in that pause and the mindfulness, right? Because I think this same principle actually applies to this as with the sweater and the benchmark. And it's it's taking ourselves, literally taking a breath in yourself when you're either excited to buy that new sweater or you're frustrated as all hell that your kids are running around being crazy mongrels, as I like to say, of my own children. And just taking that pause to recognize what the actual moment is, what the
Mhm.
feeling is, taking the pause to say, okay, they're just excited to be here, or they're, my kids a couple weeks ago were driving me bonkers, and then they both came up having permanent marker drawn on their faces, which I didn't realize was permanent marker at the time. I thought they took the regular marker bin, but no, it was permanent marker. And they were just being off the walls crazy. And I was like, I cannot deal with this. But at the same time, like taking that pause, taking that moment to pause and be like, you know what, like they're having a lot of fun with each other, and it's relatively innocent, and they're both going to go to school tomorrow with marker all over their face because they can't get it off in the shower, and that's not my problem. Their problem.
Well, and that's the you could easily look at it like, what a bunch of jackasses. I'm going to be looked at as a bad mother because my kids are going to, school with like mustaches on them or whatever it is.
So I didn't even care.
And
I'm like, you know what,
but
this is your body, please, I don't
yeah,
care.
but there's all those like different approaches you could take, or notice just the beauty in that
Hilarity.
moment. Hilarity, the beauty. I was starting with hilarity, but I think beauty, because I'm thinking you're gonna have this like eventually this teenage or 20-year-old man that they're gonna be too cool for school and just like won't even talk to you. I mean, like those periods or whatever it is, or they'll be out of the house, you never even see them. And thinking back on that memory of like them giggling and laughing and being ridiculous and drawing on each other's faces or themselves, like there's, and that's the thing. There's two ways to look at the same situation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's life. Like it's all of life. Everything is just how we interpret it. Like what we experience isn't the experience. It's how we interpret and take in that experience. So that's sort of how I think of mindfulness, is trying to introduce mindfulness in a way that we see all the possibilities at once, all the ways to react at once, and we're just present, not meditating and no thoughts in your mind at all. It's actually the exact opposite. It's being extremely focused on the present and not thinking about the past and the future, and just noticing and questioning and not taking for granted everything that's.
I mean, we could all do with a lot more mindfulness and gratitude, I think, in our lives. And I think that is such a key to so many of the world's problems. Is a little extra mindfulness and a little more gratitude for the things we do have, and stopping to recognize all the things that we do have and all the beauty that is around us all the time. And once you can sort of recognize that, life gets a lot easier.
Not just easier, more fun.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel like for myself, and especially people who are very present or they've experienced things to realize how precious and short life could be,
Mm-hmm.
then they just start seeing just infinite possibilities and how much is out there. And you'll never be able to experience it all. So just why pause and why wait? Like there's so much out there and so much to be grateful for. and so much to explore and experience. Like it's infinite. So you can never run out of new experiences and cool things. And if you're focused on just the awesome stuff, then all those experiences are cool and awesome.
Yeah, like every day, right? Like all the things, like how good your coffee tastes in the morning gets a little bit richer, and how good a good conversation with a friend is gets a little bit richer, right? And a lot of these things are things that don't even cost money. These aren't
Mm-hmm.
even things you really, I mean, obviously coffee costs money, but
Well, if you realize those are your
comparatively
awesome
not a lot.
things,
Hmm.
then you notice when it's not.
Hmm.
Like, that's a terrible cup of coffee. I'm not going to get that again.
Yeah,
Or that's why I was talking about the friends, that conversation. It was okay, but it wasn't it. So one, you appreciate the moment more, but then two, you recognize. So you just start, you know, moving more in a direction towards the things that you love and that light you up. And it will create, like, whether you believe in the law of abundance or not, or law of attraction, it will create more of that. It just has to. And for people who don't believe it, I think there's not going to be many of I think your audience is 100% on board. But it's just those simple things. It's like, the way I like to describe it is like going for a job interview. And if you go in that job interview and you're like, there is no way I'm going to get this job, I don't even want this job. It doesn't matter what you say or do or what your resume looks like, you're going to be in that interview much more likely to get rejected. It's impossible not to.
hmm,
Versus you go in extremely confident, super enthusiastic, really excited, your whole body language is different. And that's the thing, is that's why, whether you like, it doesn't have to be some cosmic event. These things have an impact, and how you are in the world is going to have an effect on how that world reacts to you.
totally, absolutely. I really want to tap into the very colorful and lively conversation we've had many times on uh, masculinity and um, all the things that sort of go into that conversation. But I was trying to figure out a way to segue into it, which apparently it's just this.
Well,
This is the
and
segue.
it could be the segue. And I've been dancing around that one because I'm really excited about, because I think that has, for me personally, like, that's something I really would love to see change around. But it's a big conversation. So
Hmm.
I'm hesitant to get too deep in it, because I mean, we could have a whole segment on this stuff. But just the simple idea, for me, I think there's a real problem in the words we're using. And so there's a lot of talk of like toxic masculinity. That's what we hear. We don't hear the opposite. Like, there's no good masculinity that we call, like, we don't know
Well,
what that is.
divine masculine is the opposite. It is.
I I have not heard that term come up very
What?
often.
Well, okay. You don't hear it out in the regular public world. You do hear it in the sort of self-help world and the sort of coaching world of woo a lot.
Okay. I I have not come across that word very often. But
Really?
regardless,
That's
regardless,
so interesting to me.
but ignoring that, like, just the words we use themselves.
Ignoring
Getting
that.
back, so with
We
for
know how
me,
passionate I am about words, by the way. Yes.
well, and that's the thing, is I'm
The words
passionate
are
about the words
important. Yeah.
too. And I think the reason I love this work so much, or see potential in it, is because I feel like we've really messed up how we describe masculine and feminine energy. And we've applied them to specific genders when they're really not gender specific. So like masculine energy isn't male only energy, and feminine energy isn't feminine only energy. And if we see it that way, these are like a yin and yang in all of us. And if we start thinking, oh, that's male and I'm female, or the opposite, I'm male and that's female, and rejecting it, what's happening is we're rejecting half of who we are because of society and these words. Like you said, words are powerful. So if we think of typical masculine energy, we forget that like those, like women have all of these same attributes.
Yeah.
And some women have primarily these attributes.
Yeah. I was just talking to Heather yesterday, actually, who was on a couple of weeks ago, and we were actually having the similar conversation about the masculine, feminine, and that, you know, we all possess those things. And I said, every time I think of masculine energy, I just think of like Excel sheets.
Right.
Like
And that's the
masculine
thing.
energy is like the structure, it's systems and processes, and like my brain always just goes to Excel. It's like that part of your brain that understands how to use an Excel sheet, like that's your masculine part of your brain, and we all have that to a degree. Maybe it's not spreadsheets for everybody, but we all possess all of that, both sides, right? And then, you know, the feminine energy is that the creative side. It's like the flowing sort of energy, and like less structure, and you know, anytime you're sort of in your creative mind, that is your feminine energy. It's not, you know, like I'm a girl and whatever, like, and it's, I don't know. I mean, I guess it is sort of emotional, falls under the feminine side of things, but we all possess both of those energies.
Mhm. But in naming it masculine and feminine,
Right.
what happens is, like as a male's been taught not to be feminine at all. Like
Right.
that's what society teaches us. So anything that would make me even remotely feminine, I'm going to reject based
Hmm.
on society.
Hmm.
So if it's, like you said, creativity, that's one thing. So most men shy away from creativity, or what the traditional viewing of creativity is, drawing and art and all these other things. But then it gets even worse, because then you mentioned like emotion and feelings. So if emotions and feelings are feminine, I'm not going to have those.
Right.
And then we start getting into like compassion and intuition. Definitely not going to do those things. So I started rejecting all those things as a man. And all I'm left with is Excel sheets, which is terrible.
It's
But then women
awful. An
is,
awful way to live.
it's an awful way to live. But then women the same way, like we think of Excel sheets and we think of like organization and we think of math and we think of investing. And it's like, well, I can't do that. That's guy stuff, which
Hmm.
is bad. And then it gets even worse, because then there's things that nobody's talking about, but I think falls into masculine energy, would be like physical play, like chasing and tag and horseplay, especially with young kids.
Hmm.
And then we lose that. And then we wonder why we want to try to introduce play back into our lives, and fun and laughter. Like some of that is masculine energy. So changing the words, or at least becoming aware that there's a balance in all of us and trying to create that balance, I think would have a much bigger impact than what we're doing right now, which is just finding poor examples of men and calling them out. I mean, that should still happen, but in terms of changing the world or the current paradigm, that's not going to have that effect. And these little things will. And we see it in young kids, and we see it on boys in the playground. We use the words like, oh, quit acting like a girl with our boys. We
Hmm.
see girls, oh, you're like a tomboy, and and why don't
Hmm.
you, you just like playing with the boys. And we use terms like that. And those little stories that we tell have a bigger impact than we think. We think it seems
Huge
light and
impact.
fun. It changes everything. And that's why we're in this world we are. So for me, playing with that conversation and noticing examples that were creating that impact and then trying to figure out ways to change that is huge, because I think the conversations change the focus in such a way that especially our young sensitive empath boys growing up today, they're gonna take a hit, I think.
Well, they did take a hit in the past. Not so much
It's going to be,
anymore, I don't think, but
I think it's going to be a bigger hit.
numerologically speaking, I've had this conversation multiple times about how our kids are born differently now. So I have a lot more hope for the future. But one thing that we have talked about before is really like how desperately we need more examples of men who are able to sort of embrace both sides of that coin. And some of, in this conversation with Heather, is it's not it's not a balance, because it's going to ebb and flow all the time. There's going to be times when we're all feeling really emotional, and there's going to be times where we're all feeling really structured, or not all, but we're going to feel more of those things, and it's just a flow of all of those emotions, really, and all of those, the different ways that we show up in the world. But what we're severely lacking right now are a lot of good examples for men to model themselves after at this point, of that more balanced and more balanced in like their embrace of all of what makes them who they are. And there is a desperate need from women out there, I'll just say, for more men that are able to embrace their quote unquote feminine, embrace those emotions, embrace all of who they are, which does include crying sometimes, and does include being, having big feelings and having emotions, and potentially being intuitive and being empathic, and embracing that part of you while also standing firm as the man, the provider, the masculine energy. We need more men who are both of those things, and we need more examples of men that are those things, so that more men can recognize that it's okay if you cry sometimes, and it's okay if you feel your emotions, and you can still be a manly man by feeling those things.
So that's why this is actually what I feel more called to talk on. It's just I haven't figured all the details around it, and it is complicated. But it's because like we hear these messages, we need more men that feel their feelings. And again, because I'm curious, I'll question. I'm like, okay, that's what we're hearing. That's what women are calling for. That's what our world's calling for. And yet, why, when we see a man crying or breaking down or being extremely effeminate or just overly emotional, everyone shies away, including the women? What is it? And so for me, that's where the curious part kicks in, because there we're associating crying with weakness,
Mm-hmm.
because the examples we've seen typically, maybe it has been a weakness, and but it's not always the case. So it's not the crying that's the problem, it's something else. So again, trying to figure out the words and the nuance. And I think we've had some conversations on this where I think there's a massive difference between a man crying and needing comfort
Mm-hmm.
versus a man crying and being confident, shoulders back, and not needing comfort, but still feeling those emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So when I think of like an example that comes up that most people think of is Barack Obama when he was crying. and he's talking about these kids dying. That was a man that didn't need comfort, extremely confident, arguably the most powerful man in the world. And there's an example where he could feel that and wasn't weak or diminished in most people's eyes because of it.
Mm-hmm.
But trying to think of other examples gets really tricky. So why is this? What's the difference? If he was sitting there and just bawling and like something happened, he's just bawling and everyone's like, whoa, like pull your shit together. Like, what's the problem? That's not good. So what's the difference? And for me, there's some of it's confidence, some of it's holding back the emotion and fighting it versus embracing it and not trying to hide it.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some difference there. Some of it's being comforted, some of it's not being comforted. There's all these little nuances. And so for me, trying to tease out those specifics so that we can start having men that can feel emotion and it's fine. Because the reality is right now, men don't know how to show that emotion in a way that is fine. And a lot of times it comes out and like you're going to see some guy crying in the corner, say there's like a disaster or, something like a fire and the guy is taking action and running into the building and the guy sitting in the, outside in a ball crying. Which man do we want? Like most women aren't going to be like, oh, I love the guy who showed his emotions because he was overwhelmed and started feeling things.
Because he was
So,
overwhelmed and started feeling things.
so that's the thing is we got to figure out what that difference is. But at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, if some guy's standing up at his father's funeral and standing up and telling this beautiful story about his dad and tears are coming down, but he's not bawling. He's just telling this conversation, shoulders back, standing there. That wouldn't look the same as that guy in the corner when there's a fire.
Yeah.
And so what's the difference?
I'm actually hearing in my own little head over here on repeat that there's actually a societal sort of looking down upon tears in general, because to a degree, the same applies to women, which is infuriating as a woman that, you can't be too passionate in a boardroom, right? You can't, there's like all the stories over time that have like, we can't have the women in power because they're too emotional and they're too erratic and they don't know what they're doing and they cry all the time. And I'm all of a sudden, this is something we haven't talked about, but all of a sudden I'm like, maybe it's just a societal problem with tears in general. And it's not even necessarily just men, because women get a lot of shit for crying too. And as a person who cries a lot, because that's how my body processes everything, really. But just energy and experiences and emotions in general, I process through tears. There's a part of me that's like, is it not even a man thing or a woman thing? Is it just tears in general? That's
Tears in general
somehow
for
we need to like figure out how we get through that.
tears in general for sure. But there's some allowance. And just
Mm-hmm.
going back to the playground, like if a girl's crying, quit being emotional or they're okay or give them space or give them time. But the guy's crying or like quit acting like a girl.
Mm-hmm.
So that the tears are a part of it, but just we are making sure our men don't feel emotion. We want
Yeah.
the rock.
Yeah.
And yet we don't. So what do we really want? And that's what gets me really excited. What do we really want? Because I know it's not the alpha male that is just a jackass and is never emotional and has no feeling and you
Mm-hmm.
can't connect with. I know that's
Mm-hmm.
not what it is. But I also know it's not the guy who's constantly weeping and needing comfort, because that also isn't attractive or sexy when that's all that person is. So trying to figure out that balance of what it is and And I think a lot of it comes with one, seeing it more so it's not so shocking.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's crazy that with all the war and all the death and all the stuff that has happened, we've seen Barack Obama cry and no other president that I can
Mm-hmm.
think of.
Yeah.
And even when he cried, people made fun of it and called him weak.
Yeah. Of course.
So what the hell's wrong with our society if that's the case? And then as a guy, I'm sitting here and you're like, women are saying cry, and you're making fun of Barack Obama because he had a few tears because all these young kids just died, and you're making fun of
Right.
him.
Right.
I'm not like, I'm not
What's
going to
the
start
incentive
crying
for
and
you to start crying and being
yeah,
emotional and open? Right.
start a dating profile and the first video is me just tearing up. Like, that's, you're not going to do that. So, but at the same time, we really need it. So how do we make it? How do we make it so it's a good thing, not a bad thing? It's a powerful thing, not a weak thing. Like
Yeah.
Obama doing that to me, not everyone, but for me and a lot of his fans saw it as a strength. Here's
Right.
someone, like, he cares. I want a president who, when he sees young kids dying, cries
Right.
or is emotional.
Feels emotions. Yeah.
Like,
Is
that's
not
a
a
good
robot.
thing. If we're going to have a war, I don't want a president who has no feeling and is sending people into battle and
Right.
has no feeling towards what that, like. So we do need those things, but it's such a complicated thing. But I do, what I do know, I don't have all the nuances figured out, but there are a few key things. Like I said, telling the kid on the playground, you're acting like a girl. We need to change that. When we see young boys hang out with girls, we're like, oh, you must be dating. Have you kissed yet? We need to stop that. We need to encourage boys and girls being friends.
Mm-hmm.
When our kids are emotional, we need to, have a conversation. What's going on? What are you feeling? We need to let them know I'm sad too, or I'm upset, or show them tears when things happen. So I do know those things will have an impact. And those are things we could start right away.
Yeah. I I wasn't you could keep going what you were saying. I was writing notes because I, that I had a whole bunch of thoughts come in as we were just having that conversation, and um I lost the second one, but I definitely know the first one was um and it's actually really fun because I'm seeing this more now. I don't know why all of a sudden I'm seeing a lot more of it, but you mentioned to me one time about how, we we do have men's groups out there, but those men's groups are men leading men. And it's like, how the hell are men leading men if nobody knows the friggin' answers, right? Like, if you're in a men's group and you're like, you know, how do I be a better husband or a better lover? It's like, go ask your wife, go ask a woman, go have that experience. And so I think, like, there's, we need more teaching and learning to and from each other. And it's actually really fun because all of a sudden, since I've sort of been aware of this, I've noticed in a few groups, a few people who actually, a few women entrepreneurs who are specifically focused on like hosting men's groups and teaching men this work, which is really cool that I've just all of a sudden in the last like 2 weeks started seeing um, that we need more of, right? We need to be open to learning from each other. And this is like also something that just drives me crazy, how when you know, get married and you go into this relationship, it's like you the only other men that you hang out with are also married men, and mostly with their wives, right? And if I was a married woman, it would be weird for me to hang out with a married man by myself. It would be less weird to hang out with that man with the husband there, right? Or, and way less weird if it's a husband and wife, but drives me crazy and is like something I've questioned recently. Like, why is it that you know, just because you grow up and you get married and you're in this relationship, do we all of a sudden only have couple friends? And that's the only safe place to hang out with someone of the opposite sex, you know? And really what we need is more of that and less of that disconnection and more of that.
So that's what I mean when I talk about simple ideas. And that's what I love. So even all this, like we just talked about, you know, trying to find that balance. Why can't we see guys crying? What's the answer? And I'm trying to tease that out. But at its core and its essence, if guys hung out with more women and women hung out with more guys, that simple act in itself, you don't need to know the why or the how or what's going to come from it. That simple act would create more of this balance we're talking about. It just would. And it would be beneficial to both sexes. And we really need it. Like the amount of women I meet that have no guy friends, the amount of guys I meet that have no women friends, like it just blows my mind and it's crazy.
Yeah.
And there's no way I could know, like you said, like I've been in a men's group and yeah, we're talking about wives and marriage and sex and parenting. And especially when we start talking about like relationship issues, there's not one woman in that room giving advice.
Yeah.
So we're all like, this sucks. Our relationships suck. And I'm like, mine too. And like, what's wrong with yours? I mean, there's no,
The
it's
blind leading the
ridiculous.
blind.
Blind leading the blind. And it's ridiculous. And that's how we live. And these are people in a men's group. Like just to get guys to be in a men's group itself is not your typical man. Already you're open to the idea of being a little bit more open and sharing and talking about feelings. And still, these guys, we can't do it. And those same guys, when I'm like, why don't we have a group with men and women? Most of those guys would not feel comfortable having the same conversations if a woman was present.
Mm.
And
So interesting, right?
And that's a problem. That's why we have a lot of these problems we have. So that if more people, like if there could be one takeaway from this, you know, interview and people listening in, just go and hang out with someone of the opposite sex at a friendship level and just hang out and have a conversation. And the perspectives are going to be different. And not only are the perspectives going to be different, so much isn't going to be different. And that's the whole thing. Like once you realize 95% of the stuff isn't different, it's not this us versus them. Like that's what kills me the most about a lot of these discussions around masculine and feminine energy or male female or toxic masculinity or even the divine masculine, like you said. Like it's all this us versus them versus like we're not talking about humans, society, people. And so much would change if that was the case, because we're not there yet. Like once we got that, then we can go up. So I see it almost like that basic level where the individual genders are good in themselves, and then we can start looking at the gender differences. But right now we're looking at the gender differences when we're not even whole as individuals. So we're short-circuiting the whole thing. It doesn't work that way. Bringing the genders together when you're not whole as an individual is just chaos.
Yeah. Well, we always need to do more work on ourselves.
Yes. Yeah. But as a society,
And
not
keep
as an
growing.
individual. Like I'm looking at it as like broad strokes, societal stuff. Yes.
Yeah, also, I mean, it's funny in the conversation I had with Jill on volunteerism, one of the things that came up in that conversation was how when we get out and we go and volunteer in these other places, you actually find that we're all just human. It doesn't matter where you live or what your circumstances are. At the end of the day, like we all have problems, we all are human. And yeah, it's funny
Well, that's
the
also the us
coincidence.
versus them. Like, oh, I'm helping these people who are less privileged and they don't have anything.
Right.
And you could easily go in thinking like you're
Savior.
superior or saving or you're better in some way. And that's the thing, is like the more time we spend with people, that are different than us, we realize we're not.
Right. We're all just
And
people.
yeah, and
We're all just
that's,
humans.
and unfortunately have started, and that's the thing, like we've moved on racism, we've moved on, gender identity, but just gender, which is like the simplest thing, we haven't moved on
Yeah.
as much.
Yeah. So much work left to do there.
Yeah.
Um, well, thank you for having this conversation. I always love diving into all of these topics, and I actually do see a lot of the threads here, right? Like there's a lot of thread in the pause and the noticing and the mindfulness. Even in this gender conversation, I think there's a thread there too of just the pause and the reevaluating and mindfulness of our words that we're using in as we're raising boys and girls. Personally, for me, boys, but um, the pause there, right? And catching ourselves and being mindful of the words that we're using, and instead of teasing, your kid who hangs out with a girl, like stopping and pausing and pulling yourself back and making that more socially acceptable for your child and not making it weird, and also calling people out when that happens. And yeah, there's a big thread here from all through all of your various ways you want to change the world. I love
Well,
it,
and it
actually. I hadn't, this is new for me. This, like, I think this is really interesting.
well, and it all stems from just being curious. That
Hmm.
really is it. That's where my pause comes from. Being curious and questioning from a position that I don't know the answers, like not from this is my hypothesis, so I'm going to figure it out. It's like just open to anything and seeing where that curiosity takes you.
Yeah, I love that. All right. Well, thank you. This is a very long conversation, but thank you so much for being here. And we will, as always, put all the links to all the things, David's social media, and link to the book to get a copy of The Golden Quest and start being a little bit more mindful and taking control of your finances a little bit, hopefully. And yeah, thank you for sharing your voice. And I look forward to the next episode here.
Thanks so much. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks.